I've driven this road more times than I can count. It cuts through northern Pennsylvania, a long stretch of two-lane highway surrounded by forest on both sides. No lights, no houses, just trees and asphalt. I usually enjoy the quiet. That night, I noticed it for the first time. The silence felt heavier than it should have. It was just past midnight when I left Harrisburg. Winter had settled in early that year, and the air pressed cold against the windshield like it wanted inside. My heater worked, but not well. I kept one hand near the vent, switching between warm air and nothing at all. I remember thinking how empty the road was. No headlights ahead. None behind me. Just the faint yellow lines stretching forward, disappearing under the hood. My name is Daniel. I knew this route well enough that I didn't bother checking the GPS. That confidence lasted until the forest changed. It wasn't sudden. It crept in slowly. The trees seemed thicker, closer to the road than usual. I had driven this stretch dozens of times, and something about the spacing felt wrong, like the forest had tightened while I wasn't looking. I kept my eyes forward. That's when I saw someone standing on the shoulder. He was on the right side of the road, a few car lengths ahead. Just standing there. Not waving. Not pacing. Still. What caught my attention wasn't the fact that he was alone out here. It was what he was wearing. A thin hoodie. No jacket. No gloves. The temperature was well below freezing. As I got closer, he slowly raised one arm, thumb extended, asking for a ride. The movement was deliberate, almost careful. I didn't slow down. I told myself I'd seen worse. I told myself people made stupid choices. Still, my grip tightened on the steering wheel as I passed him. I didn't look at his face. The forest felt closer after that. The road didn't curve. It stayed straight, but the darkness pressed in from both sides. I tried turning the radio on. Static. I drove another mile before my stomach dropped. I saw him again. Same spot on the shoulder. Same hoodie. Same posture. Standing still, facing the road. I checked my mirrors. The road behind me was empty. I hadn't turned around. I hadn't slowed down enough for him to pass me. This time he raised his arm before I got close. I didn't stop. I drove past him again, heart pounding harder than before. I forced myself to focus on the road, on the sound of the tires against asphalt. I muttered something under my breath, something pointless, just to hear a human voice. The trees didn't change. No signs. No intersections. No turnoffs. I tried to rationalize it. Maybe I misjudged distance. Maybe there were two people dressed the same. The explanations felt thin, but I held on to them. Then I saw him a third time. Same man. Same clothes. Same stillness. This time, he stood slightly closer to the road. Not enough to block me. Just enough that I had to drift left to avoid him. He didn't raise his arm. He just watched me as I passed. That was when the fear settled in properly. Not panic. Something heavier. A slow pressure in my chest that made breathing feel like work. There was no way for him to be ahead of me. The road continued on, repeating itself in ways my brain didn't want to process. The forest looked identical on both sides, like the same section copied and pasted over and over. I counted seconds. I counted breaths. Then my engine hesitated. Just for a moment. A small flicker. Enough to make my heart jump. I whispered a curse and pressed the gas slightly, trying to convince the car to behave. It didn't matter. A few seconds later, the engine died. The car rolled forward in silence before coming to a stop. I sat there gripping the wheel, staring at the empty road ahead. The heater shut off. The ticking of cooling metal filled the cabin. I didn't want to look. I looked anyway. He stepped out from between the trees. Slow. Calm. Smiling. And this time, he wasn't asking for a ride. He didn't rush toward the car. That was the worst part. He stepped out from the trees with the same calm he'd shown on the roadside, like this was a continuation of something we'd already agreed on. The thin hoodie hung loosely from his shoulders. No frost on the fabric. No breath in the air. I tried the ignition. Nothing. Just a dull click and silence. My hands shook as I twisted the key again, Harder this time, like force alone could change the outcome. The dashboard stayed dark. The headlights didn't flicker. The car felt dead in a way that went beyond mechanical failure. Outside, he kept walking. Each step was slow and even, the soles of his shoes making no sound on the asphalt. He didn't look cold. He didn't look tired. His eyes stayed fixed on the car, not angry, not desperate, patient, like he'd been waiting. I pressed my foot down on the brake, then the gas, out of instinct more than logic. The pedals sank uselessly. My breathing grew loud in the enclosed space, fogging the windshield despite the cold. "Come on," I whispered, not sure who I was talking to. He reached the passenger side and stopped inches from the window. For a moment, he just stood there, studying the inside of the car like he was deciding where to sit. Then he raised his hand and pressed his palm gently against the glass. It wasn't hard. No knocking. No tapping. Just contact. His smile widened slightly, stretching too far at the corners, like it didn't belong to the muscles underneath. His eyes didn't blink. They didn't track movement. They stayed locked on me, uncomfortably focused. I tried the ignition again. Still nothing. My chest felt tight, like something heavy was resting just beneath my ribs. I didn't want him closer. I didn't want him inside. Every part of me screamed that opening the door was the worst possible choice. My hand moved anyway. I felt it happen before I understood it. Fingers loosening. Wrist turning. The click of the lock was quiet, but it echoed in my head louder than anything else that night. "No," I said, but my voice was weak, useless. The door opened. Cold air rushed in, sharp and biting, but he didn't react to it. He stepped inside smoothly, ducking his head just enough to clear the frame, and settled into the passenger seat like he'd done it 1,000 times before. He closed the door himself. The sound of it shutting felt final. Up close he smelled wrong. Not rotten. Not sharp. Just empty. Like cold fabric that had been left outside too long. He sat with his hands folded neatly in his lap, posture relaxed, shoulders squared. His smile never faded. I stared straight ahead at the dashboard, afraid of what I'd see if I turned my head fully toward him. The silence stretched between us, thick and suffocating. Then the engine started. No hesitation. No struggle. The dashboard lights flicked on. The heater roared to life, blasting warm air like nothing had ever been wrong. The steering wheel loosened under my grip. I hadn't touched the key. I didn't ask questions. I didn't think anything. I put the car in gear and drove. "Thanks for the ride," he said casually. His voice was ordinary. Friendly even. "I'm Ethan. I won't need to go far."
I didn't respond.
I kept my eyes on the road, knuckles white around the wheel. The forest slid past on either side, unchanged, endless. I told myself I could stop at any moment. I told myself I could leave him behind. I didn't. Minutes passed. Or maybe seconds. Time felt loose, unreliable. He didn't move, didn't fidget, didn't look out the window. I could feel his gaze on me constantly, like pressure against my skin. "You can stop here," he said suddenly. "There's nothing here," I replied before I could stop myself. He tilted his head slightly. "You can't see it yet." That was the mistake. I glanced at him. His face was collapsing. The skin sagged and slid, pulling away from the structure beneath as if it were melting under invisible heat. Patches of raw red tissue showed through, glowing faintly. His smile stretched wider, impossibly wide, even as his jaw sagged. Then flames appeared. They crawled across his face without sound, without smoke, licking along his cheeks and eyes like they were exploring. His eyes burned bright, unfocused, staring past me instead of at me. Panic hit all at once. I jerked the wheel. The car swerved violently off the road, tires screaming as we slammed into something solid. The impact knocked the air out of my lungs. My forehead hit the steering wheel. Stars burst behind my eyes. For a moment, I couldn't breathe. When I lifted my head, gasping, the passenger seat was empty. No fire. No man. No smell. The door was closed. Shaking, I forced myself out of the car. The forest loomed around me, silent and still. My legs barely held me up as I stumbled away from the wreck. That's when I saw it. A few feet from the road, half hidden by trees, was a fresh mound of dirt. A wooden cross stood at its head. A name was carved into it in rough letters. Ethan Miller. Below it, smaller. Beloved son. Gone too soon. The forest stayed quiet. But I knew, with absolute certainty, that I wasn't alone anymore. I don't remember how long I stood there staring at the grave. The cold finally forced me back into my body. My breath came out in short, uneven bursts, and my hands shook so badly I had to clench them into fists just to feel like they were still mine. The forest hadn't changed. No wind. No animals. No distant sounds of a road or town. Just silence pressing in from every direction. I looked back at the car. The front end was smashed against a tree, the hood bent inward like paper. Any normal crash at that speed should have done more damage. The windshield wasn't cracked. The airbags hadn't deployed. It looked less like an accident and more like the car had simply stopped. I didn't want to stay there long enough to understand why. I got back inside, hands numb as I twisted the key. The engine started instantly. No grinding. No hesitation. The headlights cut through the trees, and the forest suddenly looked ordinary again, just dark trunks and snow-dusted ground. I didn't question it. I put the car in gear and drove. I didn't look in the passenger seat. I didn't look in the mirrors. I focused on the road ahead and pressed the gas harder than I ever had on that stretch. Within seconds, the trees began to thin. The repeating pattern broke. A reflective sign appeared at the roadside, one I recognized instantly. Route marker. Normal distance numbers. I was out. The moment the forest ended, the pressure in my chest lifted, like something had finally loosened its grip. My breathing slowed. My thoughts stopped racing. The road curved naturally, leading toward familiar lights in the distance. I drove straight home. I didn't stop for gas. I didn't pull over. I didn't check the damage to the car. I parked in my driveway, went inside, and locked the door behind me like it could keep something out. That night, I didn't sleep. Every sound in the house made me tense.
Pipes settling.
The refrigerator clicking on. The hum of electricity. I kept expecting to hear a knock, or footsteps, or a voice asking for a ride just a little farther. Nothing happened. The next morning, I told myself it had been stress, fatigue, cold, my imagination filling in gaps that didn't exist. I avoided thinking about the grave, about the name carved into the wood, about how the car had fixed itself just long enough to get me away. I didn't drive that route again. Weeks passed, then months. Life slowly returned to normal. The memory dulled around the edges, becoming something I could push aside when it surfaced. I convinced myself I'd never really known what I saw. I stopped checking the roadside when I drove at night. I stopped listening for silence. I almost believed it. Until one evening, driving home from work, I saw a car pulled over ahead of me. Hazard lights blinking. A familiar chill crawled up my spine. I slowed without meaning to. The road wasn't the same one.
Different county.
Different trees. But the feeling was unmistakable. The same weight in the air. The same unnatural quiet. Someone stood on the shoulder. A man. Thin jacket. No gloves. He didn't wave. He just stood there facing the road. I told myself to keep driving. I tightened my grip on the wheel, heart pounding, ready to pass him without slowing. Then he turned his head. Not toward me. Toward the car behind me. I checked the rearview mirror. Headlights approached in the distance. A lone vehicle, moving steadily closer. The man raised his arm slowly, thumb extended, just like before. I felt sick. I drove past him without stopping, my chest tight with a guilt I didn't understand. In the mirror, I saw the approaching car slow down. Saw its brake lights glow. I didn't watch what happened next. I didn't need to. That night, I searched for accidents in the area. No reports. No crashes. No missing persons. Nothing that explained the cold certainty settling into my stomach. I finally understood then. He wasn't stranded. He wasn't lost. He was waiting. Not for me specifically. Not anymore.
He needed rides.
Needed movement. Needed someone to take him closer to wherever he believed home was. And every time someone refused, every time someone drove past, he stayed on the road a little longer. I don't know how far he needs to go. I don't know what happens when he finally gets there. I only know this. If you ever find yourself driving alone at night and you see someone standing on the shoulder who looks like they don't belong to the cold, don't stop. But don't think for a second that stopping is the only way to let something follow you. Some things don't need an invitation. They just need to be noticed. I didn't talk about what happened on that road. Not to the police.
Not to my family.
Not even to myself. Not properly. I told people I'd hit black ice, that I'd drifted off the shoulder, and scared myself straight. That explanation worked because people want simple answers, especially when the alternative makes them uncomfortable. The car was repaired faster than I expected. The mechanic said it was strange how little damage there actually was, considering where I said I'd hit the tree. He joked that I must have been lucky. I nodded and didn't argue. I stopped driving at night for a while. When I had to, I stayed on main roads, highways, places with lights, exits, other cars. I told myself that whatever I'd seen belonged to that forest, to that stretch of road, to the cold. Distance felt like protection. Weeks passed, then months. The memory dulled, but it didn't disappear. It sat somewhere behind my eyes, waiting for quiet moments. Sometimes I'd wake up in the middle of the night, convinced I'd heard footsteps outside my window. Other times, I'd catch myself slowing down when I saw someone walking alone near the road, my body reacting before my thoughts could catch up. I never stopped. I couldn't risk it. The first sign that it wasn't over came on a night that felt too normal to matter. I was driving home from a late shift, early spring thaw softening the edges of winter. The road cut through farmland this time, open fields instead of trees. I felt calm, comfortable, almost embarrassed that I'd ever been afraid. Then I saw a car pulled over ahead. Hazard lights blinking slowly. I eased off the gas. Not because I meant to stop, but because something old and familiar tightened in my chest. The car sat at an angle on the shoulder, engine off, lights dark except for the hazards. Someone stood beside it.
A man.
Hands at his sides. Facing the road. No jacket. I didn't think. I kept driving. As I passed, I stared straight ahead, refusing to look at him directly. I felt the moment stretch, like the air itself was holding its breath. When I checked the mirror, the car was still there. The man hadn't moved, but the hazard lights were off. I told myself it meant nothing. I drove on. That night, I dreamed of the forest again. The repeating road. The silence. In the dream, I wasn't alone in the car. Someone sat beside me, smiling patiently, waiting for me to notice. I woke up shaking. The next morning, I searched local news. Accidents. Breakdowns. Missing persons. Anything tied to the road I'd driven. I found nothing. A few days later, I heard about a fatal crash on a county road not far from where I'd passed the stranded car. A driver lost control, swerved into a ditch, died at the scene. No other vehicles involved. No explanation. I stopped reading. That was when I understood. He didn't need me anymore. He didn't need the forest either. He only needed roads. Drivers. That brief moment when someone notices another human standing alone where they shouldn't be. That flicker of attention. Of recognition. I don't know what he is. I don't know if he was ever alive in a way that matters. All I know is that he waits where people are tired, cold, and just human enough to hesitate. And when someone finally does stop, when they decide to be kind or curious or brave, he moves a little closer to wherever he believes home is. Sometimes, when I'm driving at night and the road stretches empty ahead of me, I feel that same pressure in my chest. Like I'm being watched, not from the trees or the shoulder, but from the space just behind my eyes. If you ever find yourself alone on a winter road and see someone standing too still for the cold, don't stop. And don't think for a second that driving past means you're safe. Some things don't need a ride. They just need to know you saw them.